Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Becky and I like to read. It is finally time for me to share with you my top 10 books of 2022. So altogether in 2022, I managed to read 202 books. That's amazing for me. That is the best reading year I have ever had. My previous best year was in 2012 and I read 200 books and I was really trying to pass that and I did it. I'm so excited. I'm so proud of myself. So these are the 10 best books out of 202 that I read. Starting with number 10, we have Midnight in Everwood by M.A. Kuzner. This is a book that I just read this month, and it surprised me how much I loved it. This is an adult fantasy nutcracker retelling. It has a little bit of romance in it, but it's not like an overwhelming amount. It's not the main plot of the story. So I wouldn't go so far as to say it's a fantasy romance. I would just say it's a fantasy. This is about a young woman named Marietta who lives in the early 1900s, and she's reached that age 21 where she, God forbid, she's gonna be a spinster if she doesn't find somebody to marry. So her parents are very wealthy. They want her to get married and settle down in society. But Marietta, she just wants to be a ballerina. She wants to live out her dream of dancing in her local theater troupe. But when this mysterious toy maker named Dr. Drosselmeyer moves in next door, her mother is dead set on these two being married. And he's all for it, but she's like, nah, you're kind of weird, dude. But he is tasked with building the stage for her final ballet performance. And one night she goes to the stage because she wants to just explore it. And this Drosselmeyer character is there and he is sort of chasing her and luring her, and she ends up hiding in the back of a grandfather clock. And much like the wardrobe in Narnia, this leads her to Everwood. She finds herself in this wintry wood landscape where she has no idea where she is at. And she ends up discovering this little town on the edge of this forest that is pretty much made of like candy and sweets. And so she's intrigued by it, but the guards tell her, no, you need to go back home. And everybody else is telling her, you need to go back home. She's like, nah, I want to explore. So the guards, on their way to take her back to the forest where she came from, they stop at the palace and she gets curious and she goes in and she starts dancing, and the king takes notice of her and he is like, how would you like to be my personal dancer? You can dance every night for all of these people. And she's like, that is all I've ever wanted. So she takes this deal. But it doesn't go the way she wants it to because it leads down a dark path. There is a romance, like I said, in here between her and the captain of the guard, which is sort of a forbidden romance. It's a very sweet romance. I would say about not even like one chili pepper worth of steam. I want to say there's like a half a chili pepper worth of steam. I freaking adored this. I had never watched The Nutcracker, so I didn't really know like what influences were taken from it. So once I was about halfway into this, I had to go and I had to watch a version of The Nutcracker to really see where the connections were pulled from. And I was intrigued. This led me down a whole path of wanting to read more Nutcracker retellings. So great book. Highly recommend it if you're looking for a wintry, cold fantasy with just a tad bit of romance. Highly recommend. Up at number 9 is the only book I don't have a physical copy of. I was hoping somebody would buy it for me for Christmas, but no such luck. I will have to buy it one of these days for myself, and that is Pretty Broken Things by Rory Miles. This is a new adult reverse harem fantasy romance about this fae girl who gets captured and sold into this circus. She is forced to perform for the entertainment of all the other magical creatures in this fae world. And she can't escape. She's trying to get on the good side of the ringmaster in hopes that, you know, one day he'll set her free, but it's not working. The ringmaster is a jerk. But she does capture the attention of 4 of her other fellow enslaved performers. And it's their story of how they work together to try and escape this circus. I loved this one too. I'm going to say that for every single book on this list. It's a given, but I'm going to say it anyway. And it was a complete surprise to me because I am not a reverse harem girly. They really don't work for me despite me continuously trying to read them. But this one worked for me. I will say not a lot of steam once again in this book, maybe like a 1 chili pepper. But it does have the sexual tension. All of the characters in this book I felt like I got to know and connect with. They each had their own backstory and their own reasons for doing what they were doing and behaving the way they were behaving. And I couldn't pinpoint one of the love interests that I liked more than the other, because at times I would be like, I like this guy, and then I would get to know this guy better, and I'd be like, you know what, I kind of like this guy too. So that is why it surprised me how much I enjoyed this story. Coming in at number 8 is an adult historical fantasy, and that is The Lights of Prague by Nicole Jarvis. This is set in Prague, obviously, and it is about a man who is a lamplighter by day and a vampire hunter by night. Or maybe it's switched around, because you would light lamps at night and hunt vampires by day. That makes more sense. Vampires are just evil, and he is hunting them down. Lo and behold, he sort of ends up in a relationship with a woman he doesn't know is a vampire until he does. And it sort of gets him to thinking maybe not all vampires are bad. But there's some dark goings on in Prague with vampires and humans and will-o'-the-wisps, because there is a will-o'-the-wisp character in here. I've mentioned it before. It was something that I really enjoyed about this book. It was unique and I absolutely loved it. I've never read a book with a will-o'-the-wisp character before. And the way that that lore was intertwined into the story and how will-o'-the-wisps were being used in the story was so freaking awesome. So if any of that sounds good to you, I highly recommend checking this book out. Coming in at number 7 is a complete series. It is an adult fantasy romance series. It's also a reread for me, but you know, I enjoyed it so much I couldn't help but put it on this list. And that is the Wraith King series by Grace Draven. Radiance, Edelung, and the Ebos King. So I reread all of these books this year with several of my friends who also really enjoyed it. And I just loved being back with these characters. Brishan and Ildiko are two of my, they're my favorite couple. I love them. But Saravek and Aniset, they come in quite close. They have chemistry, let me tell you. It is a slow burn fantasy romance, arranged marriage for the first 2 books, and sort of a journey trope hate to love story for the 3rd book. They have such great chemistry. They have such great banter. They communicate so well. It is a very low angst story, which I personally love. I love mature characters who don't have to be so angsty in their relationships. That is what I prefer when reading romance. So I freaking adore this entire series. I am actually about to go back through and read the novellas in between each book, because I haven't read those yet. So if you love fantasy romance and you like some low angst but good communication, mature characters with the chemistry, you need to check out this series. Coming in at number 6 is a completed duology, and it is another adult fantasy romance, and that is the River of Mist duology, Serpent's Touch and Serpent's Claim by Marina Simcoe. This was a very unique fantasy romance for me, because the characters in here, while they come from a fae world, not all of them are actual fae. Our main male character in this duology is actually a Gorgonian type fae. He has snakes for hair, and his love interest cannot look at him, otherwise she will die. This is the story of our girl who is pretty much a slave for this freak show menagerie. And one day, the madame of this freak show brings in this Gorgonian creature to be a new exhibit, but he refuses to help her in any way. So he is kept in a box, away from sunlight, away from food, and he is slowly dying. When Amira ends up meeting him, and she ends up befriending him and bringing him food and just talking to him and encouraging him to stay alive. And it is their story of how they escape from this freak show and go back to the Fae realm. I loved this. Again, friends to lovers, one of my favorite things. Circus setting, check. Slow burn, check. It doesn't have a lot of spice in the first book. I would say maybe like a 1 chili pepper. The spice does amp up in book 2, but again, like only 2 chili peppers. They have such good chemistry. I thought the Gorgonian creature was such a cool, different level of fantasy romance I hadn't read before. Book 2, it took a turn I was not expecting. The character growth of Amira in this book was so amazing, and it wowed me. So if you're into fantasy romance, you're looking for something a little bit different, I highly recommend checking out this duology. From this point on, all the books I am going to share, I have given 6 stars to, and I do have 6-star in-depth reviews for each and every one of them. I will link those down below if you want to hear more of my in-depth thoughts on them. So coming in at number 5 is Anatomy of Love Story by Dana Schwartz. This is a young adult historical fiction with just a slight little dash of paranormal in it. This is about Hazel, who is living in Edinburgh in like the late 1800s. She wants to be a surgeon, but being a woman, she really doesn't have much of a chance at it. So she pretends to be a young man and she sneaks into this anatomy course. But when her teacher finds out she's a girl, he kicks her out. But he says, if you can pass the examination without having taken my class, you can become a physician. So she enlists the help of a young man who is pretty much a grave robber to bring her corpses so that she can practice her anatomy on them, and a romance develops between the two of them. I loved the Edinburgh setting. I loved the historicalness of it. I loved the gothic nature of it. I would say this could be classified as a dark academia. The title of this is a bit deceiving because, quite frankly, the romance in this, it doesn't really kick in until like the last third of the book. And it's not a very strong romance. It happens rather quickly, which is something I don't typically enjoy, but I just went with it because at that point I was so hooked and so invested in this story. I was just like, give me more, give me more, give me more. I freaking read it in one sitting because I enjoyed it so much. Coming in at number 4 is a young adult fantasy, and that is A Daughter of the Trolls by Mackenzie Catron. I've talked about this book many a times. It's made many of my top 5 lists. That's how much I loved it. This is the story of 18-year-old Sparrow who lives in this magical glen with her mother, and she protects the creatures of this glen from this evil witch named Black Annis. She also uses a wheelchair, so disability rep in this book. It's also written by an author who uses a wheelchair, so it's very authentic. And one day something happens and this witch comes in and she slaughters half of the glen. And then she takes the other half to her cave where she uses them as playthings. And so Sparrow has to go on this journey with this young man named Rush, who she grew up being friends with, to try and get them back. This is such a cozy, lovely, sweet, wholesome fantasy. I freaking loved it. The descriptions of it, just the feel of this magical forest that she has to try and navigate in a wheelchair, which really isn't designed for forests, was so cool. I would say there is a little bit of a romance in this, not much. It is another friends to love romance, which you know by now, you should know, that's my favorite thing. But I loved their chemistry and I loved how they worked out some of their problems. I loved the little bit of darkness that this story had to it. It reminded me of those classic fairy tales, and I just loved the whole vibe of this story and the characters, and it made me cry at the end. Coming in at number 3 is a new adult fantasy romance, and that is Ledge by Stacey McEwen. This is about a human girl named Dawson who she lives on this icy prison ledge with a bunch of other humans who were taken from their territory and thrown up here to be human sacrifices for these people known as the Glacians. They use them as sacrifices to sort of build up their magic supply. And Dawson is the last of her family when she gets chosen, but she does not want to be a human sacrifice. She's like, fuck all of y'all. You ain't using me to increase your power. So she takes the option of being prey. They tell her if she can make it down this wintry mountainside and reach the human lands, she can be free. So she does this, but she isn't expecting for one of the half-Glacians to be on her side and be willing to help her. So this has a journey trope, it has an enemies to lovers, it has one bed, it's very slow romance. It did start out a little bit slow, but once it got going for me, it got going and I was hooked, I was enthralled, I was invested with these characters. It has a great diverse cast of characters. I loved the enemies to lovers. I loved our winged hero. He has wings, you know, so he gave me those Bat Boy feels from ACOTAR. And I thought the story itself was very unique. The ending, oh my god, the ending, it did end on a freaking cliffhanger. Now I have to wait for the second book to come out so I can see where that goes because that ending But I loved this, and I'm so glad I finally got my collector's edition of this book. So if you like fantasy romance, you like slow burn, you like enemies to lovers, I think you should check this out. You might really enjoy it. It's not too deep of a story, so don't go in expecting that, but it was fun for me, and I really enjoyed it. Coming in at number 2 is either a young adult or a middle grade science fiction. And that is The Last Cuentista by Donna Barba Higuera. This is a book that I pretty much picked up for the cover. It was a complete cover buy for me. I spotted it across Barnes & Noble and I was like, I want to know what that's about. This is the story of a young girl named Petra, who her family is boarding this spaceship to go colonize a different planet because a meteor is about to hit Earth and kill most of the people. Petra has a visual disability, so she's really not supposed to be on this ship because they only want people who have a good chance of surviving on the planet. So they want people who are in good health, no disabilities. But her family doesn't disclose this information, so she is snuck on the ship. When they are on this ship, her and her younger brother are supposed to be put into stasis, and they are supposed to be fed information in their pods about all the history of Earth, different subjects they're supposed to learn, so that way when they get to this planet, they will have all this knowledge at their disposal. But something happens aboard this ship where the bad people take over, and they strip these children, many children on this ship, of all that information they're supposed to be fed, and they only give them information they want them to have. So when most of these children wake up, they're completely blank slates. They're pretty emotionless and they don't remember much of anything. Except for Petra. Petra wakes up and she remembers all the stories that her grandmother told her. She remembers all the lessons that she learned on Earth and the history of Earth. So she is trying to tell herself these stories to preserve them. And when other kids start hearing her sort of talk to herself and tell herself these bedtime stories, they get interested. So she becomes the last storyteller on this ship. This story broke me down in tears at least twice. I loved the familial relationships within this story. They were so heartbreaking to read about between her and her brother. I loved the planet, that the way it was described that they land on. It's very pure and untouched and untainted. I loved the sort of drama that ensued on the ship of her trying to get off of it so she can escape these bad people. I always forget when I say that I have yet to find like a spacey sci-fi book that works for me. This one, duh. I love this. I gave it 6 stars, and it does take place in space. It's a sci-fi. It's also a bit of a dystopian. And I freaking adored this book. It had such a good message in it and just such great characters. Again, another very diverse cast of characters. So if any of that sounds good to you, please pick up this book and check it out. And my number one book, the number one book out of 202 books that I've read this year, is a adult sci-fi alien romance, and that is I Married a Naga by Regine Abel. Such a short little book, but made such an impact on my life, let me tell you. So I picked up this series earlier this year just for the fun of it. The first book is I Married a Lizard Man. It's got a ridiculous cover. I just read it for fun. I ended up falling in love with this freaking series, this world, these aliens. Oh, this guy, Zaro, oh my god. He is the sweetest, swooniest hero I have ever read. He loves Serena so much. She goes to this planet as a hunter to try and weed out this population of these bad creatures, but she's told you can't cross this barrier into the Ordosians' territory, otherwise you're gonna be killed. And something happens and she ends up crossing that barrier, and so she's pretty much put into an arranged marriage so that she can live. And she's like, you know, I'm gonna give it 6 months. I can do it for 6 months and then I can leave. So she's not really into it to invest her love and her time into it. But Zaro here, he is like, no, no, no. I made a vow before my people and my God to love and cherish you, and damn it, I am going to. I am going to woo you so damn hard that you are not going to want to leave. And boy, does he ever. I freaking love this man. Like, who knew I could love a snake man so damn much? But I did. This is a slow burn romance. These two really get to know each other in their relationship, thus spice, once you get to the spice, top-notch spice. Sexually frustrating because, like, they have the sexual chemistry, and just when you think they're gonna, they don't. And I'm just like, come on already, just do it. And the anatomical differences between Zaro and Serena, it makes for some interesting spice, let me tell you. And I just loved it. I loved the world that they lived in. It was so freaking beautiful. They live in this very, like, lush green valley, and all their homes are, like, carved into rock against a mountain. So freaking beautiful. And Serena here is like, oh, you know, I'll just live out my 6 months and, like, the bare minimum of comfort. And Zaro here is like, no. I'm gonna give you every creature comfort that your human self needs. You need a soft bed, I will get it for you. You need a stove to cook your meals, I will give it for you. You need a bathroom in this house, I will give it to you. He's so sweet. I love him. I would totally marry a snake man if it was like this. Like, aliens, beam me up, please. Take me to Snake Man Planet, because I'm here for it. I loved it. So if you have ever been curious about alien romances and you haven't touched it yet, I think this is a cute series to start. It's got good world building, it's got good plot, it's a slow burn relationship, all the heroes are sweet and swoony, there's good spice, and I just, oh, I'm so glad I found this series because I just fell in love with it, and Zaro here is my man. I will fight anybody. He is mine, okay? Pick your own alien, he is mine. So read this book, but don't think you can take him because he's mine. So those are my top 10 books of 2022. Let me know down below what is your best book of the year, or if you have a top 10 video, link it down below for me so I can check it out. I would love to see what your choices were. So thank you guys so much for watching, and until my next video, which will be the last video of 2022, enjoy the rest of your year. May 2023 bring you something great to read. Bye!